This is a response to Professor Anton. Hi there, Corey. I'm responding kind of to your video on smelly vision. I say kind of because, of course, I'm using it as a jumping off point. But yeah, I was really interested in that because I wondered. I've come across this the term you used, which I think was something like bedroom sensors. I guess meaning smell and perhaps taste and maybe touch. I really like that concept, really. The idea that some sensors belong in the bedroom and some belong elsewhere, in the laboratory perhaps, or the boardroom. I guess because scent and taste perhaps are intimate. Is that a good word for them? Intimate? Whereas the other senses, particularly sight but also hearing, are more divorced. If I'm going to stick with that kind of relationship metaphor. Yeah, I mean, scent and taste even more so, I guess, are, for me at least, in a way I can see them, is that they're really right at the end of a kind of spatial separation, a spatial continuum, in which, you know, in which scent and taste, you know, they kind of disappear inside the body, don't they, you know? Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, sight is necessarily way out of the body. You know, if something is in your body or too close to your body, you can't see it. So it necessitates distance and detachment, doesn't it? Sight and hearing, although it's had a slightly different shape, doesn't it? Hearing. The one, I mean, my particular interest in that whole continuum is touch, actually, because for me that lies right on the boundary. I mean, literally on the boundary of your skin, but also on the boundary between, you know, the kind of divorced, detached, distanced way of engaging that sight particularly has, but it's not the completely enclosed internal interior sense that taste and smell to have, you know. It's right between those things. And I think, you know, particularly as those things play out in metaphor, I think, you know, I think I've talked about this before quite a bit, I suspect. But you know, when we want to try and give the impression that we're trying to be detached or divorced or separate, then we tend to use visual metaphors, don't we? Whereas if we're trying to allude to something which only we can experience because it is forever lost to you and forever invisible to you, then we talk about taste. You know, we say it's a matter of personal taste, don't we? That means that you can never access the flavour of my feelings and about the flavour of my experience, because it's already been consumed and it's inside me now. Whereas of course you can share my viewpoint if you stand near me and look in the same direction. There it is, the object on the horizon that we can both see, or there is the idea, the perspective that we can take to the world, because we occupy a similar space in relation to it. So yeah, I think as those things play out, you know, it's quite interesting. And again, I like touch. I like touch as a metaphor, and the whole kind of spectrum of things you can do with touch metaphors. Because it's not just one thing, is it? Touch. You know, well, none of them are, but obviously that's what I'm interested in. You know, because touch doesn't just, well, it registers a whole set of things. It registers things like temperature and resilience, you know, whether what you push against, like your steering wheel, is just slightly soft. I have to push quite hard, and that's part of my experience of touching it. And this particular steering wheel is very smooth where it's a bit worn. Other places have got texture. So again, there's another dimension there to touch to do with texture. And kind of, what's the word? Viscosity, I suppose. You know, there's something about viscosity in touch, isn't there? Whether what you touch gives under you, not in a spongy way, where they can be moved and bent and reshaped. I really like that. And again, you know, in a metaphorical sense, that space of information that we talk about using touch metaphors, or the mobilisation of touch metaphors to explain things, perhaps it's that way around, is better put. You know, for me, lends itself to lots of different ways of interacting. You know, sometimes that touch is like the passing of a baton in a race. You know what I mean? where our hands come quite close together on one object, and then you go off with it. I often think some of these YouTube videos are like that. You know, somebody says something and the baton is passed and there's this moment of contact, but then it's taken off further than you could have taken it yourself, or in a different direction to you would have taken it. So there's that kind of baton passing, but there's also the kind of push and force and look, I'm driving with no hands, and that whole thing, you know, there's that going on, as well as things like the caress or the stroke and the pat. You know, there's all that kind of stuff, the smoothing down of bristles and raised hair. I like that. Anyway, I don't know what I can do with smelly vision. Nothing at all, probably. I suppose, yeah, I guess I would just say that if you're saying that smelly vision is necessarily analog, I guess, whereas the distance sensors can be digitized, I'm not quite sure where touch would fit in that. I mean, it can be digitized in the most literal sense, and you can run your digits over something, but I'm not sure it can. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's on that boundary, isn't it? You know, it's on the boundary between the digital and the analog. As it floats away from the body and goes through the skin, it renders itself available for digitization or digitation, digital probing.